The cattle were lowing in the distance, their voices carrying across the morning mist like a song I had never heard before but somehow recognized. I stood on the porch of what the lawyer called my inheritance, holding a letter that had changed everything, watching the sun rise over the land that belonged to me. At 17, I had never owned anything more valuable than a worn paperback book. Now I owned 200 acres, a herd of cattle, and a house that felt like stepping into someone else's dream. The letter in my hands was from a man named Philip Reed, my great-uncle, though I had never heard his name until 3 weeks ago, when Dorothy Perez from the state office knocked on my door at Riverside Group Home. The paper was yellowed at the edges, written in careful handwriting that spoke of a different generation. It began simply, "Heather, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are probably wondering who I am and why I have left you everything I own." I had wondered exactly that. For 17 years, I had lived in the system, bouncing between foster homes and group homes, always temporary, always waiting for someone to claim me who never came. My caseworker, Susan Flores, had tried to prepare me for aging out, talking about job training programs and transitional housing, but I had seen what happened to the kids who aged out. They disappeared into a world that did not seem to have space for them. Then this letter arrived, along with legal documents that made no sense until the lawyer, Adam Thompson, explained them to me in his office in town. Philip Reed had been my grandmother's brother, he said, and he had been looking for me for years. By the time he found me, he was dying of cancer, too proud or too sick to reach out directly. Instead, he left me everything and trusted that I would find my way to his ranch in Cedar Falls, Montana. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. I need to know there are people out there who understand what it feels like to inherit a life you never knew existed. The house behind me was smaller than I had imagined, a 2-story farmhouse with white paint peeling around the window frames and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. But it was solid, built to last. And when I had walked through it yesterday with Adam Thompson, something inside me had settled in a way I had never experienced before. Every room felt like a possibility, like a space where I could finally stop being temporary. The journey to Cedar Falls had taken 2 days on a Greyhound bus, carrying everything I owned in a duffel bag and a backpack. I had left Riverside Group Home on a Tuesday morning in March, with Susan Flores driving me to the bus station and pressing $100 into my hand for emergencies. The other kids had watched me go with expressions I recognized, the careful blankness that covered hope and an envy, and the fear that good things only happen to other people. I had felt that fear too, sitting on the bus as it rolled through landscapes I had only seen in movies. What if this was some kind of mistake? What if Philip Reed had changed his mind before he died? What if the ranch was worthless, or falling down, or came with debts I could not pay? What if I was walking into another disappointment, another place where I would not belong? But as the bus had pulled into Cedar Falls, population 2,400, I had seen something that made me sit up straighter. The main street was lined with businesses that looked like they had been there for decades. Solid brick buildings with hand-painted signs and windows full of things people actually needed. There was a feed store, a diner called Nancy's Place, a hardware store with tools hanging in the window. It looked like a place where people stayed, where they built lives that lasted longer than a year or two. Adam Thompson had been waiting for me at the bus station, a tall man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had recognized me immediately, he said, because I looked like my grandmother. He had known Philip Reed for 30 years, had handled his legal affairs, and become something like a friend. Philip had talked about finding me, about making things right for the family he had lost touch with. The drive to the ranch had been quiet, both of us uncertain what to say. Adam had pointed out landmarks, the grain elevator, the school, the church where Philip had been a member for 40 years. He had told me about Philip, how he had never married, how he had worked the ranch almost after his parents died, how he had been a quiet man but respected in the community. He had been sick for 2 years, Adam said, but had kept working almost until the end, determined to leave the ranch in good condition for whoever inherited it. That whoever was me, though I still could not quite believe it. The ranch was 2 miles outside of town, down a gravel road that wound between fields where cattle grazed behind wire fences. The house sat at the end of the road, surrounded by mature trees that must have been planted decades ago. Behind it stood a red barn that looked freshly painted, and beyond that, pastures that stretched to the horizon. Adam had handed me the keys and told me he would be back the next morning to go over the details, the bank accounts, the cattle records, the equipment. He had left me alone with my inheritance and driven away, leaving me standing in the yard with my bags at my feet and the overwhelming silence of the country around me. I had spent that first night walking through the house, turning on lights and opening doors, trying to understand that this was real. The kitchen was old-fashioned but functional, with a gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. The living room had a stone fireplace and built-in bookshelves filled with novels and farming magazines and books about cattle breeding. Upstairs were three bedrooms, one clearly Philip's, with clothes still hanging in the closet and reading glasses on the nightstand. I had chosen the smallest bedroom, the one that faced east toward the pastures. It had a single bed with a quilt that looked handmade and a desk by the window where I could sit and look out at the land. I had unpacked my few belongings into the dresser drawers, and for the first time in my life, I had not wondered when I would have to pack them again. The next morning, Adam Thompson had returned with a man named Aaron Jones, who managed the cattle operation. Aaron was in his 40s, weathered and quiet, with the kind of hands that spoke of a lifetime of physical work. He had worked for Philip for 15 years, he told me, and Philip had made arrangements for him to stay on and teach me what I needed to know. We had walked the property together, Aaron explaining the rotation of the pastures, the breeding schedule, the equipment in the barn. There were 60 head of cattle, mostly Black Angus, and they were good stock, he said, well cared for and profitable. Philip had built the operation slowly over decades, never taking on debt he could not handle, always thinking long-term. The numbers Adam showed me that morning had been staggering. The ranch was worth over $500,000, free and clear. There was money in the bank, enough to cover expenses for 2 years if I was careful. Philip had even set aside funds for my education, hoping I might want to study agriculture or business. It was more than I had ever dreamed of having, more than I had thought was possible for someone like me. But with the gift came responsibility. Aaron had been patient with my questions, but I could see him evaluating me, wondering if a 17-year-old girl from the foster system could handle what Philip had built. The cattle needed daily care. The fences needed maintenance. The business required decisions about breeding and selling and planning for seasons I had never experienced. That first week, I had followed Aaron around like a shadow, learning to read the signs that told you when a cow was sick, how to check the water systems, how to move cattle from one pasture to another. My hands had blistered from handling tools I had never seen before, and my muscles had ached from work that was harder than anything I had done in the group homes. But something in me had responded to the rhythm of the work, the early mornings and the physical demands and the simple satisfaction of tasks completed. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for someone else to decide my future. Every decision about the ranch was mine to make. Every success or failure belonged to me. The town had been slower to accept me. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where newcomers were watched carefully before being accepted. I was not just a newcomer, I was a teenager with no family and no experience, inheriting property that some people thought should have gone to someone more deserving. I had heard the whispers in Nancy's place when I went in for coffee, conversations that stopped when I walked by, questions about whether I would sell the ranch to developers or let it fall into ruin. Some people were kind, like Nancy Castillo, who ran the diner and always made sure my coffee cup was full. Others were skeptical, like Jacob Morales, who owned the feed store and clearly doubted that I knew what I was doing. The test had come in May, during calving season. One of the cows had trouble delivering, and Erin was in town picking up supplies when I found her in distress in the far pasture. I had called the veterinarian, Andrea Powell, but she was an hour away with another emergency. The cow was suffering, and I knew from my reading that waiting too long could mean losing both the mother and the calf. I had delivered that calf myself, following instructions I remembered from a book in Philip's library, working in the mud and the blood, and the desperate urgency of a life hanging in the balance. When Andrea finally arrived, the calf was nursing and the mother was recovering, and I was sitting in the grass covered in mud and exhaustion and something that felt like a triumph. Word of that day had spread through town faster than I would have believed possible. By the next morning, people were looking at me differently, nodding when I passed on the street, including me in conversations at the feed store. I had proven something to them and to myself, that I was willing to do what needed to be done, that I belonged on that ranch as much as anyone. The summer had brought new challenges and new learning. I had worked with Aaron to plan the breeding program for the next year, studying bloodlines and genetics with the intensity I had once brought to school assignments. I had learned to operate the tractor, to repair fences, to read the weather signs that told you when to bring cattle in from the pastures. In the evenings, I had read through Philip's papers, trying to understand the man who had given me this life. There were farm records going back decades, careful notes about which bulls produced the best calves, which pastures recovered fastest from grazing. There were also personal things, letters from friends, photographs of the ranch in different seasons, a journal where he had written about his hopes for the future. One entry had stopped me cold. It was dated just 6 months before he died, and it said simply, "I found her. Heather Morgan, my sister Mary's granddaughter. She is 17 and in the system in Oregon. I do not have time to get to know her, but I can give her what Mary would have wanted her to have. I can give her a home." Reading those words, I had finally understood the weight of what Philip had done. He had not just left me property, he had left me a legacy, a connection to family I had never known existed. My grandmother Mary had been his younger sister, and she had died young, leaving behind a daughter who had struggled with addiction and eventually lost custody of me when I was 3. Philip had lost touch with that side of the family, but he had never stopped thinking about them. The journal entries from his last months had painted a picture of a man racing against time, getting his affairs in order, making sure the ranch would be ready for someone who knew nothing about farming. He had prepaid for repairs on the barn, updated the equipment, even arranged for Aaron to stay on as long as needed. Every decision had been made with me in mind, though he had never met me. I had cried reading those entries, sitting at the kitchen table as the sun set over the pastures. For 17 years, I had believed that no one in the world cared whether I lived or died. Now I learned that a man I had never met had spent his final months planning a future for me, believing in my ability to carry on something he had built over a lifetime. The responsibility of that trust had been overwhelming at first. Some nights, I had lain awake wondering if I was making the right decisions, if I was honoring Philip's legacy or destroying it through ignorance. But Aaron had been patient with my questions, and the community had slowly opened up to me, sharing knowledge and offering help when I needed it. By autumn, I had begun to feel like I belonged in Cedar Falls. The ranch was thriving under my ownership, the cattle were healthy, and I had learned enough to make informed decisions about the operation. I had enrolled in correspondence courses in agriculture and business, determined to be worthy of what Philip had given me. The first winter had been the hardest test. Montana winters were brutal in ways I had not imagined, with temperatures that dropped below zero for weeks at a time and snow that piled up against the barn doors. The cattle needed constant attention, breaking ice on water tanks, hauling hay to the feeders, checking for signs of frostbite or illness. I had worked alongside Aaron through blizzards that made it impossible to see 10 feet in any direction, learning to trust my instincts and the experience he shared with me. There were nights when I had fallen into bed exhausted, muscles aching from wrestling with frozen equipment, but there was satisfaction in that exhaustion, the knowledge that I had done work that mattered. Spring had brought new life to the ranch, calves born healthy and strong, pastures greening up after the long winter. I had made my first major independent decision that spring, choosing a new bull to improve the genetics of the herd. It was a significant investment, but Aaron had supported my choice and the results had validated my judgment. By my 18th birthday, I had been living on the ranch for over a year, and Cedar Falls felt like home in ways nowhere else ever had. The people who had been skeptical of me at first had become friends and neighbors, always ready to offer advice or help when I needed it. Nancy Castillo had become something like a surrogate mother, checking on me when the weather was bad, making sure I was eating properly during the busy seasons. Joshua Price, who owned the neighboring ranch, had become a mentor and friend. He was in his 60s, had known Philip since they were boys, and he had taken it upon himself to teach me the things Aaron could not: the business side of ranching, the politics of water rights and grazing permits, the long-term planning that separated successful operations from those that failed. The ranch was profitable now, not just breaking even, but actually making money that I could reinvest in improvements. I had upgraded some of the fencing, bought new equipment, and started planning for expansion. The cattle operation was just the beginning, Joshua had told me. With good management, the ranch could support additional enterprises, maybe sheep or horses, maybe crops if I wanted to diversify. But more than the financial success, it was the sense of belonging that had changed my life. I had a place in the community now, responsibilities that people counted on me to fulfill. When the school needed volunteers for the county fair, I was asked to help. When the church organized fundraisers, I was included in the planning. I was not just Philip Reed's heir anymore. I was Heather Morgan, rancher, neighbor, member of the community. The loneliness that had defined my childhood had been replaced by connections I had never thought possible. Aaron's family had adopted me as an honorary member, including me in holiday celebrations and family gatherings. The other ranchers treated me as an equal now, asking my opinion on market conditions and sharing information about new techniques or equipment. I had also begun to understand Philip better through the people who had known him. He had been quiet but generous, the kind of man who helped neighbors without being asked, who served on the school board and the county planning commission because someone needed to do the work. He had never married, but he had been deeply connected to the community, and that connection was part of what he had passed on to me. The second winter had been easier, not because the weather was milder, but because I knew what to expect. I had prepared better, stocking up on feed and supplies, winterizing equipment before the first snow. The cattle had come through in excellent condition, and I had felt the quiet satisfaction of competence, of knowing that I could handle whatever challenges the ranch presented. Spring had brought new opportunities. A neighboring rancher had approached me about leasing some of my pasture for his cattle, and after consulting with Joshua and Aaron, I had agreed to an arrangement that brought in additional income while helping a neighbor. It was the kind of decision Philip would have made, practical but also generous, building relationships that would benefit everyone involved. That summer, I had received a letter that changed everything again. It was from a lawyer in Oregon, informing me that my birth mother had died and asking if I wanted to claim her personal effects. I had not seen or heard from her since I was 3, and I had long ago stopped wondering about her. But something in me had needed to know, to understand the woman who had given me life and then lost the ability to care for me. The trip back to Oregon had been difficult in ways I had not expected. My mother had died alone in a studio apartment, her few possessions mostly worthless except for a shoebox of photographs and letters. Among them were pictures of me as a baby and letters from Philip to my grandmother, asking about me, offering help that had never been accepted. Reading those letters, I had finally understood the full story of my family. Philip had tried to stay in touch after my grandmother died, had offered to take me in when my mother's addiction became too severe for her to care for me. But my mother had been too proud or too ashamed to accept help, and by the time the state intervened, Philip had lost track of where I had been placed. He had spent years searching for me through official channels that moved slowly and protected privacy more than they facilitated reunions. By the time he found me, he was too sick to travel, too weak to take on the responsibility of a teenage girl who would need more care than he could provide. But he could give me something better than a few months with a dying man. He could give me a future, a foundation on which to build a life. Returning to the ranch after that trip, I had felt the full weight of what I had been given. Not just land and cattle and money, but a second chance at family, at belonging, at building something that would last. Philip had broken the cycle of abandonment and loss that had defined my family for generations, and now it was up to me to continue what he had started. The third year had brought new challenges and new growth. I had expanded the cattle operation, adding 20 head and improving the genetics of the herd. I had also started a small side business, raising and training horses, something I had always wanted to try. The work was different from cattle, requiring patience and intuition, but it was rewarding in ways that surprised me. The community had embraced my success, celebrating when I won a ribbon at the county fair for one of my horses, supporting me when I applied for a loan to expand the operation. I was no longer the uncertain teenager who had inherited a ranch she did not understand. I was a businesswoman, a rancher, someone who contributed to the community and was valued for what she brought to it. But the most important change had been internal. The constant fear that had defined my childhood, the expectation that good things would be taken away, had gradually faded. I had learned to trust in my own abilities, to believe that I deserved the life I had built. The ranch was not just Philip's gift to me anymore. It was something I had earned through my own work and determination. The fourth year had brought romance into my life in the form of a veterinarian named Dr. Marcus Webb, who had moved to Cedar Falls to take over Andrea Powell's practice when she retired. He was 32, kind and patient, with a gentle way with animals that extended to his relationships with people. We had met when one of my horses had colic, and he had spent the night helping me nurse her back to health. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on shared work and mutual respect before it became something deeper. He understood the demands of ranch life, the early mornings and the unpredictable schedule, the way animals always came first. He also understood my past, the way trust came hard for someone who had been abandoned too many times. Marcus had proposed on a spring morning as we worked together to deliver a difficult calf, both of us covered in mud and exhaustion and the joy of a successful birth. It was not romantic in any conventional sense, but it was perfect for us. A proposal that recognized the life we had built together and the future we wanted to share. We had married that fall in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with the community we had both come to love gathered around us. Nancy Castillo had catered the reception, Aaron had walked me down the aisle, and Joshua Price had performed the ceremony as a justice of the peace. It was a wedding that honored Philip's memory and celebrated the family I had found in Cedar Falls. The fifth year had brought our first child, a daughter we named Mary after my grandmother and Philip's sister. Holding her for the first time, I had felt the completion of a circle that had been broken for generations. She would grow up knowing where she belonged, surrounded by people who loved her, inheriting not just land and cattle, but the security of a family that would never abandon her. As I write this, Mary is 2 years old, running through the pastures with the fearless joy of a child who has never known uncertainty. She calls the cattle by the names I have given them, helps me collect eggs from the chickens we added to the operation, falls asleep to the sound of her father's voice reading stories by the fireplace Philip built with his own hands. The ranch has continued to prosper under our management. We have expanded into organic beef production, capitalizing on the growing market for sustainably raised meat. We have also started hosting educational tours for school groups, sharing the knowledge Philip and the community have passed on to me with the next generation. But the real measure of our success is not financial. It is in the relationships we have built, the community we have joined, the legacy we are creating for our daughter. Every morning when I wake up in the house Philip left me, I am reminded that family is not just about blood. It is about the people who choose to love you, who invest in your future, who believe in your potential even when you cannot see it yourself. The community of Cedar Falls has become the family I never had as a child. When Mary was born, the neighbors brought meals for weeks, helping us through the exhaustion of new parenthood. When a drought threatened the pastures last summer, other ranchers offered to share their water rights, ensuring that our cattle would not suffer. When Marcus needed to attend a veterinary conference, Aaron's wife stayed with Mary and me, treating us like the family she had always considered us to be. This sense of belonging extends beyond personal relationships to a deeper connection with the land itself. I understand now why Philip never left this place, why he chose to live and die on the ranch his parents had built. The land becomes part of you after a while, its rhythms matching your own, its seasons marking the passage of time in ways that feel more meaningful than calendar dates. I have learned to read the weather in the way clouds gather over the mountains, to know the health of the pastures by the color of the grass, to predict the behavior of the cattle by subtle changes in their movement and sound. This knowledge was not learned from books, but earned through years of daily observation, passed down through generations of ranchers who understood that success came from working with the land rather than against it. The financial aspects of the ranch have stabilized into predictable patterns. We sell cattle twice a year, time the breeding to take advantage of market conditions, and maintain reserves for the inevitable challenges that come with agricultural life. The organic certification has opened new markets and commanded premium prices, validating our decision to focus on quality over quantity. But beyond the economics, There is satisfaction in producing food that nourishes families, in maintaining practices that protect the environment, in contributing to a way of life that connects people to the source of their sustenance. Every pound of beef we sell represents months of careful stewardship, attention to animal welfare, and respect for the natural systems that make our operation possible. The educational tours have become one of my favorite aspects of the ranch. Children from town and from the city arrive wide-eyed and excited, many seeing cattle up close for the first time. I watch them discover where their food comes from, learn about the work that goes into raising animals, and develop respect for the farmers and ranchers who feed the world. These visits remind me of my own journey from ignorance to understanding, from uncertainty to confidence. 5 years ago, I knew nothing about cattle or ranching or rural life. Now I am teaching others, sharing knowledge that was given to me freely by people who believed in my potential. It is a continuation of the generosity Philip showed me, a way of honoring his gift by passing it forward. Marcus and I have begun planning for the future in ways that extend beyond our own lifetimes. We are implementing conservation practices that will protect the land for future generations, establishing trust funds that will ensure Mary's education and the ranch's continuity, and building relationships with other sustainable agriculture operations that share our values. The ranch has become more than a business or even a home. It is a legacy, a statement about the possibility of redemption and the power of community to transform individual lives. Every improvement we make, every relationship we build, every child we teach about agriculture is an investment in a future that extends far beyond our own time on this land. I often think about Philip during the quiet moments of ranch life, when I am checking cattle in the early morning or sitting on the porch in the evening watching the sunset over the pastures. I wonder what he would think of the changes we have made, the direction we have taken the operation, the family we have built in the house he left empty. I believe he would be proud not just of the financial success, but of the way we have honored his values of hard work, community service, and environmental stewardship. The ranch he left me has become something larger than he probably had imagined, but it remains true to the principles he lived by and the love he felt for this land. The letters I found in his papers speak of his hope that whoever inherited the ranch would understand its value beyond mere property. He wanted his legacy to continue through someone who would appreciate the life he had built, who would contribute to the community he had served, who would find in this place the same sense of purpose and belonging that had sustained him through decades of solitary work. Mary will grow up with advantages I never had, but more importantly, she will grow up with the security of knowing she belongs somewhere, that she is part of something larger than herself. She will inherit not just land and cattle, but the knowledge of how to work the land responsibly, the relationships that sustain rural communities, and the confidence that comes from being deeply rooted in a place that values her contributions. When she is old enough, I will tell her about Philip Reed, the great-great-uncle she never met who changed the trajectory of our family story. I will show her his letters, his journals, his careful records of a life lived with purpose and integrity. I will help her understand that the ranch she will inherit was not just built with money and labor, but with love and hope for future generations. As I finish writing this story, Mary is napping in the room that was once mine, the room where I first unpacked my few belongings and wondered if I would ever really belong here. The afternoon light streams through the same window where I used to sit and watch the cattle, trying to understand the life I had inherited. The transformation from that uncertain 17-year-old to the woman I am today feels both gradual and miraculous. Every skill I have learned, every relationship I have built, every success I have achieved has been built on the foundation Philip provided, but it has been earned through my own determination and the support of a community that chose to embrace me. The ranch today supports not just our family, but provides employment for Aaron and two other full-time workers, contributes to the local economy through our purchases and investments, and serves as an example of sustainable agriculture practices that other operations are beginning to adopt. What began as one man's gift to an unknown relative has grown into something that benefits the entire community. But the most important legacy is not economic or even environmental. It is the proof that family can be created as well as inherited, that belonging is something you can build through commitment and contribution, That love can reach across years and miles to change lives in ways the giver never imagined possible. For those of you watching this who have felt abandoned or forgotten, who have wondered if anyone in the world cares about your future, I want you to know that family comes in many forms. Sometimes it is the people who choose to love you, the communities that welcome you, the mentors who invest in your potential. Sometimes it is a letter from someone you never met who saw something in you worth preserving and nurturing. Philip Reed gave me more than a ranch. He gave me proof that I mattered, that my future was worth planning for, that someone believed I could build something meaningful with my life. That gift transformed not just my circumstances, but my understanding of my own worth and potential. If you are struggling with feelings of abandonment or uncertainty about your future, please know that your story is not over. There are people in this world who will choose to love you, communities that will welcome your contributions, opportunities that will allow you to build the life you dream of living. I want to hear your stories too. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, what dreams you are working toward, what communities have embraced you. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that belonging is possible, that family can be found as well as born into, that every life has the potential for transformation and purpose. Thank you for listening to my story, for being part of the community that extends beyond the boundaries of Cedar Falls to include everyone who believes in the power of love to change lives. May you find your own version of home, your own sense of belonging, your own legacy worth building and passing on.